Girl Power. It was a beautiful evening on the island of Sodor, and Emily and Molly were relaxing in the sun before taking their last trains of the day. Emily was telling Molly all about what had happened on her first day, and how she'd saved Thomas and Oliver from crashing on the intersection. Molly was amazed. "Wow, Emily, that was so brave of you," she said. "I wish I was as brave as that." Emily smiled. "I'm sure you're a lot braver than you think you are, Molly," she puffed. "And besides, you're just as useful as those bigger engines." Just as Emily said that, James puffed up beside them. "Oh, I don't think so, Emily," he said smugly. "As far as I'm concerned, engines of the female gender, while useful to some degree, they'll never be as useful as us male engines. Why else would the Fat Controller have more male engines on his railway than females?" Molly was very upset at this, but Emily was furious. "James, how dare you!" she scolded. But James didn't care. He just laughed. "Oh, you act like all female engines are all high and mighty, but I mean, look at Molly over here. She's about as timid and shy as a little kitten." And James puffed arrogantly away. Emily was very cross at what he had said, but Molly felt sad. "Is that true?" she asked. "Are male engines really more useful than female ones?" "Of course not!" Emily huffed. "Don't listen to James, Molly. You're as useful can get." But Molly wasn't so sure. Even though she had grown much more confident since her first day, she still had moments of doubting herself. The next morning, the Fat Controller came to Tidmouth Sheds to give the engines their jobs for the day. "Emily," said the Fat Controller, "there's a long goods train that needs to be taken to the other side of the island. I would like you and James to take it together." Emily puffed forward slightly. "Excuse me, sir," she said, "but could James do it on his own instead?" You see, Emily was still very upset with James for what he'd said to her and Molly the day before. "Well," said the Fat Controller, "it's quite a long train. It'll need a lot of strength." Then James puffed forward. "Oh, I can pull that train without Emily," he boasted. "I'm sure I'm strong enough." "Oh, well, if you say so, James," said the Fat Controller. The Fat Controller instead gave Emily another job, taking trucks to the coaling plant with Molly. It was a rather dull job, but both engines knew it was important, though they were still both upset about what James had said. Just then, Mavis rolled by with some stone trucks. "Hello, you two," Mavis said cheerfully. "Why the long faces?" Emily told her about James. When Mavis heard this, she gave a great big frown. "Not very useful indeed," she scoffed. "We may not be the same gender as them, but we're just as useful as them. Don't listen to what James says, Molly. You're much more useful than given credit for, I'm sure of that." "Thank you, Mavis," said Molly. "But I don't know how to prove James wrong." "It's simple," said Emily. "I can help you. When the chance is given, of course." Molly smiled, but she still wasn't very sure about it. Meanwhile, James was pulling the big goods train to take to the other side of the island. But it was very heavy. He was beginning to think that maybe he should have taken it with Emily. But he was still determined to prove that male engines were more useful than female ones. But then something cracked, and James ground to a halt. "What's happened?" he exclaimed. "Well, that's torn it," said his driver. "You've burst your safety valve. That's what you get for trying to pull this train all by yourself." "Oh, botheration!" scoffed James. This would happen on a day like this. Pulling trucks as well. When will something go right for me? That's quite enough, James, said his driver sternly. Now, I'll go and phone for help. When James's driver got to the nearest telephone box, he phoned for help. But the only available engines were Emily and Molly. When Emily's driver told them the situation, Emily was very skeptical. James said female engines were not as useful as male ones, she said crossly. Just leave him there, he deserves it. But what about the train? Said her driver. You don't want that being late, do you? Of course not, replied Molly. Come on, Emily, we've got to go and help James. Emily knew that Molly and her driver were right. So once they had steam, the two female engines hurried away to rescue James. When they found him, James was looking rather sheepish. Well, 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 teased Emily. Broken down, have we, James? I thought male engines were more useful than female ones. James pretended he hadn't heard. Emily was coupled up in front of James, and Molly was coupled up behind. When everything was ready, the long cavalcade set off. They finally arrived at Vickerstown Station, where the Fat Controller was waiting. Well done, you two, he said to Molly and Emily. That was very useful indeed. He then turned to James. As for you, he scolded, don't think I haven't heard what you've said to Molly and Emily yesterday. That was extremely rude of you. Honestly, James, I expect better from you, especially with how long you've been on this railway. I think a few weeks of shunting trucks in the yard will do you good. It'll definitely serve you right for being so sexist. James blushed. He hated that job. But deep down, he did know that he deserved it. After all, he had been very rude to Emily and Molly. He didn't say it directly to their faces, but Emily could tell that James was sorry, and so could Molly. They were just glad that they'd proven James wrong and shown that female engines can be just as useful as male ones.